Anurag, hi, good to have you with us. How have you been?
All well. Thank you so much for having me over as well, Ashu. It's all been spectacular.
Super. Anurag, this is an important conversation, right? And this is a conversation that I'm actually looking forward to. And my team hates me for sort of saying this, right? Because every conversation that I tend to get into, there's a certain amount of excitement that I have, and I think every business that is kind of that we've had the chance to speak, right, is kind of disrupting the traditional, right, which makes it exciting for me. And like I said, my team hates me for that, but I think this is truly very, very interesting, right? Because I think what you are doing at Club, right, is really disrupting how traditional finance and especially debt has operated, and been available for businesses, right? And I think through the course, I'm looking to sort of discuss some of the finer nuances of what you're sort of doing it at Club, right? But I think more importantly, this is something which is not necessarily an instrument which existed traditionally, right? This is literally rocket fuel, right? Which is now empowering business to achieve greater heights. This is very significant contribution which is coming in, right? The understanding of risk is very different, right? The way you are defining that risk is very different, right? And I think there's a huge founder focus thesis and emphasis, right? Which is a huge support, right? And I think in dynamic times that we are in, it just becomes important to have that kind of a support structure, right? Which not many traditional organizations have the wherewithal to sort of, or the sensitivity, or the design to sort of offer, right? Thus, this becomes a very interesting conversation in very interesting times.
Thank you so much for that, for the understanding of what we're trying to build, and absolutely look forward to the discussion, to sharing more. It's 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 been a journey of connecting the dots for us as well,
Right.
and it's everything that we've done in our professional backgrounds come together,
Right.
which is why this is slightly different. It's unconventional, but hopefully value accretive for the ecosystem and all.
Awesome. Anurag, before we dive into the session, right, before we start talking about Club, right, and the way you are doing it, right, and like I said, the nuances in the business, right, that are very critical, right, to the entire offering, right. Before we get on to discussing that, I'd love you to take me, through your background. A quick round of introductions would be helpful as a starting point.
Sounds good. Just in terms of introduction, I sort of break it into three parts as well of my career and my evolution, as I will say. The first phase is essentially building and assisting companies in terms of getting capital.
Right.
That started out with my first job in a boutique investment bank. But the seed of that actually lies a little bit earlier in my undergrad,
Right.
when I did my first startup. And that
Interesting.
startup was a massive failure in itself. In fact, I didn't even know I was doing a startup. I was just trying to solve a problem.
Right.
But as part of that experience, I came across the term entrepreneurship, came across the term venture capital, and thought, wow, if I
Right.
could enable other entrepreneurs,
Mhm.
as a failed entrepreneur, that was a life worth living more than
Right.
anything else. So I was
Right.
trying to craft my journey into venture capital. Investment banking turned out to be the first logical step,
Right.
enabling companies to raise capital. Got my break into venture capital, and then started working first with a Valley-based fund called DFJ, and then later on with a Singapore-based fund called Vertex,
Right.
out of their India offices, leading investments as part of the investment team. So that's the first part of my career, assisting companies both on the buy
Right.
side, sell side to raise capital.
Right.
The second part is where I'd say that I realized that I was not being a good investor simply because I had no idea of the operational side.
Right.
And that was not where I wanted to be in my
Right.
life and my career. And so I moved over to the operational side,
Uh-huh.
where I ended up joining InMobi, a global
Right.
product unicorn, where I was
Right.
responsible for new initiatives.
Interesting.
As part of the founding team of two initiatives, the first one is now called Glance, which has become a unicorn in itself.
Wow.
So
Right.
extremely proud and privileged to have been a part of that team in its early iterations. The second part was the telco data business of InMobi, which was also a great initiative called True Factor
Right.
that I was a part of as well. So that's the second part of my career, where I was working in a larger corporate,
Right.
if you will, but trying to build something for that corporate in terms of taking the innovation envelope further. The
Interesting.
third one is the entrepreneurial journey, which happened after InMobi, where Club got started out. Again,
Right.
it's an amalgamation of everything put together along with
Right.
my co-founder's background. And we wanted to figure out a way that great businesses can raise capital quite scalably. In fact,
Right.
Club started out as a consumer brand itself.
Interesting.
And as we were building out that consumer brand, we realized we were researching with lots of founders,
Right.
trying to understand their pain points, realized that capital is a much bigger pain point. And
Right.
so we were trying to solve, we realized that we could solve that pain point.
Right.
And that's how Club got started up. That's the third part of my sort of evolution professionally in the
Interesting.
form of Club. Education-wise, IIT Delhi, Wharton, and a CFA.
Lovely. Lovely. Anurag, thank you so much for doing that, right? But I'm going to move into the Club, discussion, right? And that's one part, like I said, and I've been looking forward to. As soon as I look at the website, right, there's something which is extremely catchy, right? It completely and immediately draws my attention to, knowing more, right, about the core offering, right? Is a statement which says, flexible growth capital for loved brands, right? Now, tell me a little more about Club, right? You are not a traditional, player, right? What you're essentially doing is bringing in growth capital for these brands, right? There's a lot of support that you're sort of, like I mentioned at the outset of our conversation, right? There's a lot of support that you're bringing in for many of these founders, right? Tell me the construct of Club, right? How do you differentiate yourself? Right? What's the core thesis, right? At Club as a as a as a product, right? Which has been defined for a market which is now moving into a very, very different kind of territory, right? Tell me a little more about that.
Sure. So a few sub questions there. So let me take
Sure.
each one after the other. But first of all, thank you so much for the kind words about our website. Truly appreciate it. The core thesis for us is actually incredibly simple at some level,
Right.
in that if there's a great company with good financials, good product,
Right.
good set of management team, founding team, and more importantly, good customer affinity, or what is called brand affinity in itself, then why is it not getting rewarded in terms of raising more capital? More importantly, how can we get more capital to the company without diluting down the company in itself? So the non-dilutive element is very, very important for us.
Right.
And so that is tagged along with the flexibility and the scalability of capital in itself.
Right.
So how can we make it more flexible, which is link it to revenue as opposed to linking it to a fixed EMI structure, which makes it a little harder, especially for brands which have seasonality, especially for brands which are in a post-COVID ecosystem where there are revenue shocks. The fixed EMI paradigm simply does not work for them. And so that's where we bring in more flexibility. But last but not the least, we are also bringing in scalability in that we tend to do repeat rounds of investments for companies as their revenue scales up as well. So we can just keep on providing them with more and more rounds of capital, ideally at a lower cost of capital in itself. So it becomes a great way for companies to raise non-dilutive capital and keep on scaling. That's a simpler core thesis. I'll get to the mission vision later on. How we differentiate ourselves is in a few mechanisms. Of course, non-dilutive capital is the first one. The second one, which I'd say is something that we've heard back as feedback from our brand partners as well, is the speed at which we can operate. Capital can come into a company's bank account in record time without all the hoops that they have to jump through, without the bells and whistles of more conventional, traditional structures. And that is something that companies tend to appreciate a whole lot as well. And the third one is just the ability to see us as a scalable provider of capital, and that we will continue to do multiple rounds of investments as the company scale up. Last but not the least, we are still building that element of support that you just touched upon. It's a core part of our thesis, because for us, if we are driving more growth towards our brand, it actually de-risks our own core product as well. It's actually fundamentally intrinsic to our business model. We're still building out more and more elements of that. Today, we have a lot of partnerships, but we can do a lot more in terms of driving more support to our brand partners in the future as well. But that's a sort of summary of all the questions put together.
Very interesting. Anurag, you touched upon, the financing part of it, right? In the sense, and more importantly, the speed, right, of financing. Non-dilutive is something that I think many people understand today, right? And I think also in the traditional sense, right? And I think when you're you are in a position in business where you are capable to handle the pressures of debt, right, and the consistency with which you need to repay, I think that becomes a choice for many, many people, right? I think revenue-based financing is a fairly new concept, right? What I want to particularly understand is how do you, for example, dissect a business, right, financially? Because I think when you're possibly entering, and this could also, and you could possibly also reflect on the stage when you enter these businesses, right? Is that a financial visibility in a market which is as complicated as India is, right? Might not be a reflection of what this business could be, right? And that could possibly open you to very different kind of risk, right? So tell me a little more about, how do you, for example, what's the process of understanding these businesses? What's the process of underwriting some of these businesses, right? And of course, like you said, I mean, you're doing it with speed, right? My sense is this must be institutionalized, right, at certain levels. I'd love to understand a little more about that construct.
Sure. So typically, I mean, most lending companies would call this as an underwriting process or
Right.
a credit analysis process.
Right.
We at Club call it a risk and data analysis,
Interesting.
which is indexing on two core themes,
Right.
which is utilizing data
Mhm.
to understand the risk of the company better. Because fundamentally, finance in the financial world is driven on a simple concept in that you're pricing return for a certain amount of risk.
Right.
And so for each amount of risk, there is a certain amount of return expectation. And we are in that business of assessing risk and then expecting a commensurate return out of that risk. All of this is done on the back of data and alternative data sets that are coming out of the company in itself. But we are not, and that's a fundamental sort of a starting point for us. We don't start out bucketing a company at the very start saying, this is the return expectation.
Right.
That comes later for us. We are first trying to assess its risk and then trying to price that risk for a commensurate return in itself. Now, for us, I think what you rightly said is India is a complex market. And because it's a complex market, one simply cannot take a classical model and throw that in and assume that it works in itself. For us, we sort of look at life slightly differently in that there is a 4-step process in terms of understanding the risk of the company. The first one is interestingly more about the revenue of the company. The interesting part is not the revenue of the company. The interesting part is verifying the revenue of the company against the streams of data that it is generating. What that means is we are looking at GST statements, financial statements, but also revenue data that is coming out from different digital channels and correlating that against more of these traditional sources of revenue in itself. You'd be surprised. I was pleasantly surprised, though I always knew this, in that this verification of revenue that people speak about, that most players in the Western markets don't even need to do, is actually a skill in itself that one needs to build. It's a muscle that one needs to build because of the amount of shenanigans that that can be there. In fact, I can say this as well, in that we've seen companies, venture-backed companies, where the quoted and stated revenue simply does not match what we are seeing at some level. So revenue verification becomes very important for us.
I know what you mean.
Absolutely. And that then moves on to the collectability of that revenue in itself. So that's the first stage of our analysis. The second stage of our analysis is understanding the operational efficiency of that economic engine. Each company is ultimately an economic engine, which converts input of capital into output of revenue. And for us, we are trying to understand what is the efficiency of that engine to be able to convert input capital into output revenue. And that ends up being the second leg of our understanding of the business in itself. The third one is essentially understanding the risk components of the business a lot more and a lot better. We have some of our own internal and proprietary models and parameters, as I would call them, that we are looking at, that according to us are far more important in a market like India, that we tend to assess a whole lot more and that we score the companies against, which then leads out to a final output for us, which is the fourth layer of our risk and data engine, which is pricing that particular risk. So we model out what are the expectations for that particular risk to get to 4 output parameters, which is the quantum of capital, the tenor, the revenue share, and the yield that we should be getting for that particular risk. That's the process that we follow internally. And then, of course, it's a combination of machines with a final human gatekeeping check. And we're always building our credit models and improving on that with the backtesting of data. But interestingly, it's a data-driven process. So far, we have only met 3 founders of companies out of the nearly 100 companies that we've deployed capital in. And that's purely done because of our data engine itself, which is run on machines itself.
Phenomenal. Anurag, I have so many questions, right? I mean, I am a big fan of risk, right? And I think risk, in a post-COVID environment, I think it's just kind of taking a very different kind of a shape. I think we are essentially getting into very uncharted territories, right? Nobody really knows. And I completely buy your point, right? I think data is going to be the chief navigator, right? For I think each one of us, and I think organizations will have to set themselves up. And I think financiers will exactly have to sort of do the same thing, which possibly, you and some of the other players in the revenue-based financing play are kind of gearing much faster and better themselves, preparing themselves better for an environment like that, right? And before I get into more risk, right, more consumer behavioral aspects, right, I want to understand a few more aspects around the product that you have, right? Now, what I understand from what you just told me in the earlier point that you made, right, is that you're sitting somewhere in the middle of being a venture capitalist and a traditional financier, right? Where the way you are defining risk in each entity means that this is more skewed towards understanding that business better, right? Which essentially makes you look like a venture capital business, right? Does that also mean that scale for you is going to be, say, 20, 30, 40 companies in a year, and not necessarily that of a traditional financier in an NBFC environment or a bank environment, right? Would be for many, many businesses out there which have a certain set process. They essentially follow that set process. I mean, whether it's relevant or not is a second question, right? But does that mean that you'll possibly be dealing and engaging with lesser number of companies and not a very large number of companies that are typical financial institution would, right? What's your give me a sense of that, right? Which could also mean you could help me define the future, right? But I want to understand that balance that you're trying to maintain, right? And second, your book is going to have variances of very different nature, right? Because the risk and return pricing is different in each case, right? What are the matrices for you as a business then, that case?
Got it. Super. So very interesting question in that how do we see the balance? And we sort of sit in the middle. Actually, I'll sort of tell you where we are across all of these dimensions, assuming that classical venture capital sits on one side, classical lending sits on the other. And we sort of sit on all of the sides at the same point in time. Let me explain that.
Sure.
Fundamentally, from a risk and data analysis standpoint, we're a combination of both of these classical skill sets built together. So if you were to look at our risk and data team, it is a combination of someone who comes in from a credit background, a classical lending background. It comes in with someone who was a venture capitalist, was an analyst looking at companies from a growth lens, and then a data person who comes in. So it's actually a combination of these skill sets put together, which is where we sort of sit in the spectrum, tying the two sides together. But because we are doing this at a very large scale, because of machines looking at the data, because we are looking at alternative system of records to be able to make the assessments, we don't fall on the side of classical venture capital in terms of the number of companies. We fall on the side of more traditional lending companies in terms of both the depth and the breadth in terms of companies and sectors that we can look at. So for us, we've now completed investments in about 100 odd companies in the last year. And for us, that's the year where we've grown. We've been growing. So for us, we only want to increase the speed many folds. Ideally, for us, we see that revenue-based financing is going to mimic any other debt product that you would take from a bank, for that matter, from any SME financing company. It would be there in the overall mix of the companies as they scale up over a period of time. And so we don't see this as being a a company where we are only going to make 20 to 40 investments in a year. We do that in a month, quite honestly, at today's scale. But we only want to make that go many-fold up because we can on the back of the data. So that's just a sort of a thesis building in terms of where we go. Not a less number of companies, but more deeper in terms of how we analyze each and every single sector category.
Right.
We can be as nuanced as within a particular sector, we
Right.
can be far more nuanced as well. For example, within furniture, or
Right.
rather home furnishings as a category or as a sector, we can be as nuanced as home office furniture. Which is this whole new growing segment after COVID in itself,
right?
Which is different from apparels or furnishings in itself,
right.
Which can be very different from someone who is doing the same furnishings but for the export markets. So
right.
all of these are sub nuances in themselves that we can analyze at a very high throughput in itself.
Interesting.
That leads on to the next question with regards to metrics. Now, quick clarification. When you say metrics, are you referring to metrics for club or metrics that we assess in other companies? Which one are you referring to?
Both, actually, right? But I think in this question, I would want to understand more about the matrices of the businesses, right? I think for club, we can possibly come that in a different question, right? Which I have in my set of questions, right? But I think here it's about the companies that you invest in.
Fair enough. So when it comes to a company and the key metrics that we are looking at, I wish I could tell you there is a one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
It tends to vary again by the same thesis in that a sector has multiple categories, and how do we start understanding each category better and each sector better at a theoretical level? Goes without saying, I mean, revenue is important, margins are important, the ability to understand coverage ratios are fairly important, the ability to understand how quickly can that business turn around things is important. Just the credit history of the company overall is a very interesting indicator about how companies are built. But as we start getting into that bucket of how that sector operates and how that category operates, the nuances go even more deeper. They are no different from what we would look at in the venture capital business at some level. The same set of metrics, but you need to fine tune them into certain ranges for that particular category, and that's where it starts going down a little deeper. I could tell you that we look at ROASes or inventory levels, etc., but it's not a one-size-fits-all answer at all. I could tell you about the fact that we look at store efficiency as a metric, but again, it's not a one-size-fits-all answer at all. So all of these then start becoming more nuanced.
While I asked you that question and when you were answering this question, right? I mean, in my mind, in my heart, I knew this was an unfair question, right? I think because you just do it in, this is, you essentially a run-up, right? To something which will possibly unfold into being a large industry, right? And I completely buy in what you're saying, Anurag, right? I think a lot of these parameters are going to become visible over a period of time, right? I think as behaviors shift, right? I think more consistency and institutionalization happens in how we consume, purchase, buy, right? And there's a certain homogeneity that comes in the consumer behavior. I think that's when the real time for revenue-based financing is I think that's going to be the peak of revenue-based financing, right? And I think that's where you'll possibly have a little more visibility. I think till then it's going to be a path of caution, right? Where and I completely resonate with what you're saying, right? I mean, not one size is going to fit all, right? But I think constantly you have to be added. You're going to be building a thesis around it, stuff like that. I have a bunch of other operational questions, right? But before I come to that, I think there's something that we've been alluding to, right? Which is risk, right? And of course, risk has been in businesses in many forms. But I think post-COVID I think this has been a huge transformation or a transformative time for the country, right? Like India, which is an extremely large ship, right? Which operates in many layers. Regionalities, seasonalities, sources of income, right? Savings rates. There are many such factors that come into this entire scheme of things, right? And thus the behavior of companies, right? And the founders, right? In terms of how they kind of optimize their operations, right? Is that, Anurag, this has been a very interesting time, right? I think while of course on one hand we've seen a huge surge in digital adoption, right? Digital consumption, right? Where a lot of these trends are now starting to become clear, which is essentially what you're using as a factor to understand risk in these businesses that you're sort of participating in. Another thing which has become very critical, right? And to me, very complicated, when I start to see it at a distance, is that influence is something which is increasing many folds, right? Everybody's essentially consuming content from the same screen. And I think content is a very large role to play in these entire scheme of things, right? Uh, the complexity is that there is a lot of DIY content that is getting generated, right? You're seeing a lot of fads fly. To me, if you're looking at any business today, right, and especially when it's in the consumer side of it, I think fads will make it very difficult to predict a trend, right? The longevity of life that products, for example, had for 3, 4, 5 years, 6 years, right, will essentially reduce to just about 13, 14, 15 months, right? Which could possibly mean there could be a huge trap for lenders like yourself, the new age lenders for you like yourself, right? Who might just get trapped into that because one, this could just be a very short-lived trend. That's number one. Number two, this might not necessarily carry to the larger India, which of course operates, like I said, across many nets. What are your thoughts about that, right? Would this in a way make it difficult for you to understand the complexities that are there in each businesses? That's one. Second, like I said, this is a trend, or a trend might not play out in the larger India. And that could possibly leave you overexposed to a certain call that you take. What are your thoughts about the phase that we're kind of experiencing, right? To me, like I said, I mean, it's extremely complicated phase.
Sure. And because it is extremely complicated, let me start by saying there's no good answer to these things, right? I mean, these are approaches. Everyone is taking an approach to these things. We also have a few theses, or rather theses around this. So let me start off by a question in that for us, we are seeing that complexity has definitely increased at some level with regards to companies which are now going digital at a in a very rapid manner. But that's not just for revenue-based financing.
Right.
I'd argue that it exists for all sorts of financing options at this point in time across the board. So if you're an equity investor, you're getting impacted the same way in that the binary nature of a company going great or going absolutely zero exists.
Right.
If you are more of an EMI-based lender as well, which is more of a traditional lender, the risk still stays in that if the going concern of the business is under question, then how do you think about risk in such a world? So we've been extremely lucky at some level in that we're a COVID baby. We started out during COVID, so for some for a lot of reasons, some of these we do try and incorporate in our business model through different product solutions as well. But fundamentally, we cannot do away with the risk that there is a certain life cycle associated with a brand.
Right.
We are in the business of trying to figure out what that life cycle is, and for us to price our risk under that. Right? So for us, one very interesting, actually not even interesting, one very important parameter of risk assessment is understanding what is that tenor risk that we are taking on the company itself. Is it going to be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months, 36 months? And it's a full spectrum in itself. That's one of the ways that we think about this as well, in that we are trying to make a prediction about the future within a certain defined time frame. The second one is another way of responding to your question. While there is complexity, we believe in embracing complexity more than anything else. Why not utilize this as an input signal into our engine in itself? And so we are right now trying to think through how can we look at influencer-led content as an input engine, or rather the output of that, the outcomes of that as an input into our risk assessment engine. It's in some ways, I think we've been very lucky that we looked at influencer marketing a long time before many people. In fact, my co-founder and I, our previous startup was in influencer marketing many years back when the term was not introduced as well. And so we do believe that there are trends, there are, for lack of a better word, fads. Smart companies are actually able to figure this out and keep moving from one trend to another. So the nature of the business has a longer duration, while individual products will have their own life cycles. We're in the business of programmatic lending. So some of these are input signals for us to be able to determine output. And we do think that this is just the start of how influencer-led commerce
Mhm.
will get capital.
Interesting.
Please mark my words, we're at the start of it across the world. This is not just
Right.
a trend for India only. It's across the world, we're trying to figure out how will influencer-led commerce get capital such that it becomes large in itself.
Right.
RBF has always been a natural ally because
Mhm.
it tends to absorb both the positives and the negatives, but we're
Right.
going to see more innovation in this area.
I completely, kind of completely buy into what you're saying, right? I think those are aspects that need to be, I think that dynamism needs to be factored into credit models, right? I think we'll not be able to do with archaic traditional credit models that have existed. I think we're in a very different ecosystem. And I completely agree to what you're saying, right? I think a lot of that dynamism, a lot of that communication needs to sort of get factored in, right? A lot of those trends need to be understood much earlier, much faster than a traditional lender would. And I think a traditional lender stands at a much bigger risk, right? Because they're not designed to understand a lot of these factors, right? I think they're essentially designed to do it in a very traditional way. Uh, right, and this is a very different consumption phase that we're kind of entering.
So might I interrupt that train of thought?
Please.
Just one
Yeah, please.
important nuance. I, for one, am also not a believer that RBF is going to come in, revenue-based financing is going to come in and absolutely upset traditional equity models or debt models.
Right.
So I, for one, do not believe that traditional lending will absolutely go into a tailspin because of how the market is evolving overall. If anything, what we are seeing is that traditional lenders, traditional investors are now embracing this as well and trying to figure out, hey, who can we partner with?
Right.
And we want to be one of them. We want to be one of their partners saying, why don't we work together? Why don't we collaborate together and figure out ways that we simultaneously and together go out into the future in itself? So for us, we don't think that the scale and the size of traditional lending can be disrupted overnight. It is not going to be. There's a reason why it has existed for many years, and it will for many years. Can we be a partner in that change? That's the way we think about it.
So you kind of walked me into my next question, right? And literally that. So I think the idea is, and I think what I was trying to sort of communicate, right, is not that the traditional lenders are going to get disrupted, right? I think areas are going to get earmarked very clearly, right? Marketing, for example, is largely going to go into revenue-based financing, right? Or there are smaller activities which need that nitro, which are going to be the nitro booster, right? For very quick sales, very quick turnaround, all of that, right? Which could move faster. I think it's essentially going to go into revenue-based financing. I think more consistent financing, for example, your infrastructure, capital expenditure, working capital requirements. I think will continue to sort of be fulfilled, right? So I think it's going to be a hybrid environment that we're going to be in, right? It's not going to be this or that, and I completely kind of agree with that. And I think that's essentially how I also look at it, in a sense. But like I said, you walked me into my next sort of question, right? What's the kind of exposure that you take, right? So I mean, when you're assessing a company, right, and given the dynamic times that we are in, right? I mean, what percentage of their, for example, overall requirement would you step into? Are you going to step into doing just about A, B, C, D activities, which are a predefined play in your structure? That's the kind of exposure that you take, or do you leave it? You assess the overall opportunity to make a participation and leave it to the founders to sort of prioritize in terms of how do they want to use their capital, right? What is that relationship engagement like?
Got it. Super. So I think I will say this, that we are extremely lucky to be starting off in India as the launch market, because we knew India is going to be a complex market, and so all answers, all responses are complex in nature.
Right.
In that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Most Western philosophies and thinking and style of startup building is all about just focus on one particular problem solution and just go bat it out.
Right.
It doesn't work in complex markets across South Asia, Southeast Asia, because the markets are very different. They're structured very differently. So the answer varies in that for some companies, it is for specific use cases that is closely looked at, monitored, and ensured that it is only going in for that use case. In some companies where there's a hybrid nature of the use case of capital, for example, both marketing and inventory. It's interesting, most companies are actually in a vicious loop where they need capital for both. If they don't get inventory, what will they market? And once they market, they need inventory. Right. So it's sort of a vicious loop that they're in. So we give capital for both. And in some cases where the company is even larger, we can be a lot more fluid in terms of the use cases of capital, which includes CapEx as well. So it varies by the size of the company, the maturity of the company, and the risk of it. But more often than not, the use cases of capital are for high ROI use cases, where there is clarity of, or clarity to some extent of the input capital to output revenue. So marketing ends up being a great use case. Inventory ends up being a great use case. CapEx in some use cases for some companies ends up being a great use case. Those are the ones that we finance. There'll be few exceptions here and there, but that's these three are the core buckets that we go after.
Very interesting. Anurag, what's the sources of fund? I mean, are you operating as a marketplace? Are you investing, lending through your own books? What's the structure like that?
It's a combination. Ultimately, our belief is that India is a supply constrained market. For us, supply is the capital part. And we've always had a fundamental belief that markets across South Asia, Southeast Asia are fundamentally supply constrained. There isn't enough institutional liquidity that exists in Western markets. So we over innovate on the supply side. So we operate as a marketplace, Ashu, to your question, in that we tap into different pools of capital with the right regulatory structure to target companies across the risk return spectrum. So it's a combination thereof of 4 product solutions at this point in time.
Interesting. Do you want to tell me about under the hood? Interesting. Do you want to briefly touch upon this?
Sure. So the ones that are more clearly understood is that there is one part of our marketplace where institutional investors, NBFCs in India, can deploy capital in companies. And we sort of work very closely with these NBFC partners. The second one is where we have a patron marketplace, essentially individual investors who can deploy capital in companies and get returns as a monthly revenue share. So that's a second product. And the other two are they are still in the phase of build out. So we're going to make those announcements over the next few months.
And I'll we'll wait for those announcements to happen, right? And I'm going to move in my next question. Typically when you talk of India market, right? I think recovery is a huge issue, right? Investing is not, right? Or lending is not, right? Recovery is something which takes a lot of bandwidth. That's not something that, I think any lender wants to sort of get into. Like I said, there's a huge complexity which is sort of involved in that process, right? How does it play out for you? Does it plays out exactly like a traditional lender, or is there a different mechanics that you have around it? You fortified yourself in a way where the collections happen and it's essentially channelized into a more efficient structure, right? And you don't necessarily have to go through a very archaic process of recovering capital, right? Once you've lended in that environment. What's that setup like?
Sure. So the advantage of being a digital first company is that even that component of our business, what we call repayments, is digital in nature. And so to answer your question, everything is digital. Everything is done digitally. But the interesting nuance is that India, again, is not a one-size-fits-all market. We were being compared as part of our previous round. We were being compared against some Western players in the RBF space, in the revenue-based financing space. And we were asked a question about a repayment stack. And the person doing the diligence on the other end was surprised that we actually had built out so many solutions versus one that they had built. And we had 6 solutions built out.
Interesting.
Welcome to India as a market, in that giving capital is easy, taking it back is the tough part. And so it's a combination of 6 different things that we can apply in conjunction, depending on the company, to be able to get the repayments in place. But it's not just about that. I think what we've done is, as a lending business, as an industry overall, I think we've maligned the process a whole lot as well. In that collections are just, it's just the not so good part, both for the borrower and for the lender as well. And what we're trying to do is just make it automated, make it digital in nature, so that no one is cracking skulls at each other, trying to say, butting heads, saying how to do it, when to do it.
Right.
We try and remove the variability from the equation as much as is possible.
Right.
And that is only possible as a digital company in itself. So again, it's a combination of solutions, including the old archaic way. There's nothing wrong with the old archaic way in itself, but we are more digital in nature. And if we have to apply fail safes, then we will go on to fail safes, which are more traditional in nature.
Interesting. Do you want to tell me a little more about that, Anurag? Because that's a like I said, that's a complicated part, right? I mean, when you look at many other players that today now, setting up escrow accounts, right? There's an eNACH mandate that is there. That exists. I mean, there is like just so much which is happening, right? There's an interesting combination of pieces that is coming together, right? To essentially enable that, like I said, fortify your collections, right? Ease that entire process. Because it's an extremely complicated environment, right? I mean, do you want to tell me a little more about some of these 6 pieces that you kind of alluded to? Do you want to pick up 1 or 2 of them, which essentially are designed to ensure that there's lowest friction possible, right? I mean, both the sides, right? If you could tell me a little more about that, I'd be
sure. To the extent possible that I can share, ultimately think of any digital revenue stream that a company is generating. Ideally, we would like to sit in that digital revenue stream and be able to seamlessly do repayments through that digital stream in itself. Now, the easiest one or the one that is utilized most frequently is, say, for example, payment gateways in itself. So how do you split revenue from payment gateways? So that's one solution right there of the 6. But we also spoke about ACH, NACH mandates and escrows, and those are also solutions that we would apply. So depending again on the size of the company, on the size of the investment, and the nature of the business in itself, the answers can vary by combination that we need to apply to be able to recover capital. But it's not just about capital recovery. I think it is also for the company to be able to repay us in a seamless manner. Is the point that I'm trying to make. You make it more difficult for the company, and there is no value for it as well.
Interesting.
The other part about us is that we do most repayments at a high frequency. So for us, in most cases, we are getting capital back at a super normal frequency compared to traditional lenders. That makes our stack a little more interesting as well. We've now started having initial discussions about taking our tech data stack, both in terms of deploying capital in companies and getting money back out to other investors in the marketplace as well, saying, why don't you utilize our stack in itself? We call that internally revenue-based financing as a service. So we ourselves are a SaaS platform to some level that should be able to enable this.
Fantastic. I think each one of us is going to agree, right? I think at the end of the day, it's the founder that you're backing, right? And especially, in a complex market condition, I think that's the only constant that you kind of have, right? And I think it's the mindset, which just essentially, that fighting spirit, which is very, very important, right? Irrespective of what the condition is. I think we've seen one such abnormal condition, right? And I think but that's prepared us for many, many more, right? And like I said, we're entering a phase, which is not necessarily, there's nothing that really helps us in that phase, right? It's something where we are uncharted territories, how consumption is going to behave. I think models are going to be built, but I think we'll have to, we'll have to factor in, delinquencies, we'll have to factor in other problems, right? We'll have to factor in even the longevity of many, many businesses, right? But I think the only sort of constant in an environment like that becomes the founder, right? Now, when you do what you do, right, in revenue-based finance, right? How critical, in VC ecosystem, founder is the only constant. There's a huge amount of time that we spend on understanding the founder, mindset, team, so on and so forth, right? Does that works equally, importantly and deeply when you are lending in a certain business? Here, when you're doing RBF, or largely dependent on numbers, where the numbers could be a representation of whatever that individual, the cause that an individual is taking, right? How do you crack that particular piece?
This is that particular dimension where we sit somewhere in the middle of traditional equity and debt in terms of our assessment. Because we've done traditional equity and traditional debt as a team, we try and incorporate the best of both worlds. So the answer to your question is yes, we do look at founders very closely, but we are not indexing on a 5, 7, 10-year time horizon on the founder. Our time horizons are different, and so the benchmark that we would apply from a traditional equity lens is lower, if you will. Not that the quality bar is lower, just the predictability part is lower in terms of what we expect out of the founding team in itself. But we sit on the other side of the spectrum as well, which is the traditional lending mindset, where we are able to remove the biases associated with certain patterns, if you will, that creep in. When I say patterns that creep in, what is the academic pedigree of the founder, which is actually a very big thing when we're on the equity side. But doing what we do, we realize that actually there is a very poor correlation between academic pedigrees and outputs, if at all. Another one, a very big one, gender. And we find that to be extremely odd in that gender is actually a very critical input, both on the equity and debt side. We were surprised by this. We've been surprised about this all of our professional career. In our case, we don't index on it at all. 45% of the companies that we've bagged has a woman founder, and we're incredibly privileged to be able to do that because there is no bias associated with that particular profile in itself. Where the founder is coming from, in that there is a certain stated, unstated bias on the equity side towards more fancier founders, if you will, usually coming in from tier 1, tier 2 cities. Doesn't matter to us at all. In fact, if anything, we think there are great founders coming out of tier 2, tier 3 cities of India that are not getting capital from traditional sources, and that we can remove the bias on against. So for us, while it's again a balance in that we are trying to make a prediction on the founding team, the management team, for a certain defined time frame. Because that time frame is different, we are removing some of the biases. And interestingly, we would have assumed that all of traditional lending did not have any such biases. We were horribly wrong in that the number of decisions taken because of education, race, gender, caste, religion was high, at least anecdotally. So I do not know, I can back that up in a study, but we found that to be high, and hopefully we can remove that, because none of that matters. The data does matter. There is some value that we ascribe to the founding team, but that doesn't have a large correlation per se.
Interesting. Anurag, I have a slightly different view, right? I mean, I come from a banking background. I've done, both these sides of it, right? And my view is, for example, I think with what has existed traditionally, right, in terms of, how do you sort of say, for example, underwrite an asset, right? How do you do a credit assessment, right? And market possibility and so on and so forth, right? My sense is, I think, a digital ecosystem, when you're especially doing something around, say, for example, cosmetics, right? You need to understand what the founding team is, right? And I think having a woman should possibly, or having a woman founder, or co-founder, or leader should possibly get a higher ranking, because, what is essentially now happening, especially in a D2C environment, right, is that a lot of experiential and observational understanding is required to build that business to the next sort of a level, right? If you, in a traditional ecosystem, if you have the kind of biases that you do, right, or if in a newer model where you just take away those biases, right, might just not factor in the sensitivity required to understand that business better, right, which could lead into the longevity assessment of that business, right? But I think I'm at a distance, right? It's easier said than done, right? And I can imagine the kind of challenges with what you face and your team faces on a day-to-day basis, right? And I think there's a huge pressure on, given that the kind of business that you're in, I think institutionalizing a lot of that becomes very, very important, right? And I understand those complexities to it. Towards the end of the conversation, I can't, not discuss Bharat, right? And I think especially the kind of business that you are in, and it's something that you alluded to in your last sort of point, Bharat is very, very interesting, right? I think today the digital environment is kind of democratized. Somebody sitting in a Kanpur or a Lucknow or a Bhopal or Indore, right? Or even further down, right? Vidisha, for example, right? Or a Sihor, which is very famous for, the wheat that the Sharbati wheat that we sort of get, right? To kind of build products, right? To sort of sell to India, maybe sell globally, right? At as sort of they graduate. That's an incredible possibility which is kind of emerged, right? How do you look at all of that? I mean, this is not a segment which was necessarily a participant, right? There were more consumers. There was an arbitrage and an information lag. Unfortunately, none of that exists, right? The inhibition is gone, right? what do you make out of this, right? Have you been lending into that segment? Have you been participating in that segment? Have you been talking to these founders, right? As the thesis could sort of still take time for those, from a maturity standpoint, right? But what's your take on Bharat, Anurag? I mean, I am personally very excited about it. I think every conversation that I'm having today has an element of Bharat, right? I think that's the next big thing, right? Which is going to drive a huge, consumption play, right? How do you see this opportunity?
Yeah. So for us, we never thought of it from a Bharat lens. Actually, I'll sort of make that disclaimer. We thought of it more from a local ecosystem perspective.
Right.
Our belief is that there are enough and more great local brands, local companies getting created, which don't fit the pattern. Again, they're not fitting the pattern for a variety of reasons that we've just discussed.
Right.
And those are the interesting ones that we think we definitely want to go after, and go after in a much, much more bigger manner. Each city that you pick up any of the cities that you've mentioned, has enough and more of these local brands that you would know of in that particular city. Like depending on where you're from, tier 2, tier 3, there are these local brands that exist, and you know that they're never going to be across India. They might be regional at best, but they definitely are well known in that city, town, wherever they are.
Right.
We've seen that, especially with digitization coming in, the playing field has now become level, or nearly level. And at least we are predicting that in a few years from now, it will start becoming even more than where we are today. That's a segment we want to go after.
Right.
We want to go after each and every single local brand that is out there in a Nagpur, in a Surat, in a Chandigarh, in a Ludhiana, in a Panipat, places that we cannot access in itself. Digital allows us to access those markets. Recently, it's anecdotal. There was a company that came out of Surat that is just becoming a D2C brand. They are into kurtis, and they've been doing that for many, many years at this point in time. And they realized, hang on, why don't we become a D2C brand ourselves? And they launched the D2C brand as an experiment, and it has already started delivering great results for the company. And so those are the interesting nuances that are happening that we feel incredibly privileged and honored to participate in at some level, because they are driving local ecosystems. It is not just about consumption in itself. They then employ people in their ecosystems in the region in itself, which is to us extremely important as part of our journey in terms of what we want to do. And once you're thinking about it from a Bharat or an India lens, you go like, why not global, right? So very quickly, some of these entrepreneurs are shifting gears, and that's fundamentally awesome.
What's interesting, right? When you say, and when we talk about Bharat, right? I think for the second generation as well. I mean, the whole digitization is like a new possibility, right? And there have been, there have been many such businesses, right, that have existed traditionally. I mean, the forefathers set it up, right? And the newer generation is completely now looking at it a different way, right? And I think that's the new digital possibility, right? And you've in a way answered a very cliched question, right? I think which is part of every interaction, right? What are the next 2 years? Like, you've answered that in a way, right? But I would want a slightly more macro take, right? And also an advice for many founders that are out there, right? Who are creating for a very like I said, evolved market now, a very connected market, complex market, right? An influenced market, which is not necessarily very predictable, which is going to change very fast, right? Next 2 years at a macro level, what are some of the things that you see are going to be important phases? They're going to play out. It's important for founders to understand that, and advice for founders as
well. I, for one, don't feel myself qualified in any form, shape, or manner to speak about founders as advice, but I will take a stab at what I think would be interesting at some level. The first, I think, is embracing chaos. I know we all speak about it at some fundamental level. It's there in all sorts of business books. But what we are seeing is that chaos that exists at an India level and now at a global level has only increased. The number of facets, inputs, parameters that a founder and a founding team has to incorporate are a lot more. And I absolutely believe that teams which are faster at adapting it will will see that there is more to be done there. I usually see that most founding teams, after a certain point in time, they fall into a sense of lull. And you see a huge survivor bias. That kind of companies that you would see emerge out are the ones that are actually able to adapt very, very rapidly.
Right.
That's the reason why that happens. A second one that I feel about very, very strongly at some level, in that discarding bad advice, including this one, is very important. I think we are sitting in an era where there is an information overload.
Right.
We get so much of information that it's hard to disambiguate what is relevant and what is not.
Right.
The same thesis applied on a particular business model works wonders. When applied on a different business model, is actually just going to take it down.
Right.
And that intellect to say what is it that I should pick up and not becomes very important. So I say not just for founders, I say for all of these investors, advisors, people who are veterans in the industry. A lot of advice is just free flowing. You can tap into it digitally. But what's relevant for this particular business model, for this particular market, this particular phase is important to understand. Those would be two that I would that I can think top of my head.
Interesting. And like, why did I want you to do that is that you're at a vantage point. Given that I think not a lot of example, founders have an opportunity of looking at many businesses, right? And like I said, I mean, many of these parameters, it tends to, in a founders, when you're a founder, right? I mean, you're building a business, you're just too close to the situation, right? And of course, there is a certain affinity that you develop, there's a certain love that you have for what you're doing, right? And that just puts you in a very different kind of a territory, and it builds certain biases, right? Your possibility of going wrong is much higher, and thus it becomes important. Somebody like yourself, who is taking that call, right? Who is understanding a lot of those parameters, right? Is dissecting through a lot of that information. It becomes important that we have some advice, some suggestions coming through, right? And I think beautifully put, right? I completely agree with what you, the way you put it. I think it's just so much more important in that sense. Anurag, thank you so much for taking the time out. It was a lovely conversation. How I want by the end of every conversation for it to go on, and we can discuss more and more aspects around, what one founder is doing. I'm going to bring this one to a close here, but I look forward to having you very soon with us, where we, deep dive into very specific aspects of revenue-based financing. It's something which is unfolding. It's something which is very, very interesting. While I say that, I also believe that these are very, very early days, right? And my heart goes out to you and your team for the complexity that you're dealing with, right? And given the market that India is, it's not a homogeneous market. It's a very unpredictable market. And like I said earlier, we operate at many layers, right? And levels. I think I wish that all of this homogeneity becomes more across markets. It just becomes so much more easier to predict that environment, to operate in that environment, which makes it easy for you and your team and many other people who are operating in the same segment, right? Enabling and empowering more and more businesses, right? I think that's what we need as an economy. Anurag, thank you so much for taking the time. It was a lovely conversation with you.
Likewise, thank you so much. Our beauty is in our diversity, and it is somewhat incumbent upon us as a responsibility to be able to absorb that diversity in itself.
Right.
So to that extent, we are extremely privileged to be building what we are doing. Thank you so much for having me over. It was a fun conversation. Look forward to more such conversations.
Thank you.
Have a lovely day. Take care. Bye.
See you.